My name is David. I was at a downtown bar waiting for my wife to join me for dinner when I unexpectedly bumped into an old acquaintance, Ethan Willis. Years ago, I'd nearly accepted a job working under him at Willis, Harper, and Associates. At the time, I was young and swayed by superficial impressions, so I chose a different agency instead. Looking back, I like to think I'd make a smarter decision now. We greeted one another warmly, and he joined me at the small table. "It's been a while, David," he said as we shook hands. "I was genuinely happy to see you again. You've always been a good guy and would have made an excellent boss had I worked for you. Who knows? Maybe I'd still be with your firm, comfortably employed, and avoided all the chaos that followed. Instead, I ended up picking a subpar company that eventually drove me to start my own small agency with my former best friend and business partner, Nate Barrett. A partnership that ultimately dissolved in betrayal and heartache." After a few minutes of catching up, Ethan said, "So, David, I haven't been keeping up with the industry much. A heart issue sidelined me a few years ago, and now I'm mostly retired. Sid Harper runs the firm these days." "Oh," I replied, curious. "What brings you here? Business or pleasure?" Ethan chuckled and held up his glass of orange juice. "Still cracking jokes, huh, David? That's good. Humor helps during tough times." I raised my own glass in a silent toast. "A little of both, I guess," he continued. "I'm visiting my grandkids and passing the time during a long layover. I've got an 8-hour wait before my next flight, so I figured downtown was better than sitting in some airport lounge. Plus, you don't run into old friends there like you do here. Mind if I stick around for a bit?" "Not at all," I said, smiling. "It's good to see you." Before I could say more, my phone buzzed. "David here," I answered. "Hi, babe." "Something came up," said the familiar voice of my wife. "Damn," I replied, laughing. "Well, I wish you'd tell that terrible boss of yours to get you some help already. How long will it take?" 3 hours at most," she said. "That's not too bad," I teased. "Tell your slave driver I'll have words with him next time I see him. Anyway, let me know when you're done. I'll be at the Irish pub, catching up with an old friend. You might need to pour me into a cab later, but I'll be ready for dinner. Love you too. See you soon." Hanging up, I turned back to Ethan. "Looks like we've got some time to catch up." "Great," he said with a grin. He sipped his drink and gave me a thoughtful look. "Last I heard, you and Nate were making waves in the industry. What happened?" "It's a long story, Ethan," I said, my voice tinged with resignation. "Hey, I've got time," he replied. "I love a good story." And so, I began. We were equal partners. Our strengths balanced each other's weaknesses. I was the creative mind and the writer, while Nate had a knack for visuals and design. I pitched the campaigns and wrote the copy, and he brought them to life. His attention to detail meshed perfectly with my obsession over words. For 6 years, we made it work. 2 years at a terrible agency we'd both rather forget, and 4 running Harris and Barrett Advertising. That agency was our baby, and it started to thrive. We built a solid reputation and even got hired discreetly by some of the larger firms to troubleshoot their troubled campaigns. They paid us well for our insights. We were like doctors for failing advertisements. Nate had just married a wonderful woman named Rachel when we first met, and I'd married my wife, Emma, 2 years before that. Our wives hit it off from the start, becoming as close as Nate and I, maybe closer. The 4 of us were inseparable. We even went in on a lakefront cabin and a cruiser boat together, a shared getaway that symbolizes our bond. It was a sweet setup, but as you'll hear, that all came crashing down in a way I never saw coming. Next day was brutal. I finally managed to move. My mind was torn. Grab the emergency axe from the dock and go in swinging, or back away and think of a plan. Instinctively, I retreated. As I backed down the boat's transom, I heard Emma's panicked voice. "No, Nate. It's David. It's him. He was right there." "Oh my God, he saw us," said my wife. Glancing toward the dock, I noticed the 2 cars, Logan's Range Rover and my Subaru. An idea began forming, not much of a plan, but better than nothing. Just as I stood at the edge of the boat, ready to dive, Nate's agitated voice rose. "Are you sure? You idiot." Of course, it was David. "Who else would it be?" said Emma. As I was near the car, Nate's voice carried faintly behind me. "David, Buddy, wait. The Range Rover stood nearby, and I slashed into one of the rear tires, then the spare hanging off the back. Air hissed out in sharp bursts, fading quickly. Behind me, the boat engine finally roared to life as it neared the dock, but I didn't look back. I jumped into the Subaru, which started reliably on the first try. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Emma and Nate sprinting up from the dock, their swimsuits hastily thrown on. All cleaned up for the public. Wouldn't want to shock any onlookers. Slamming the car into reverse, I floored it, spinning the wheel into a bootlegger's turn. Gravel flew up in a miniature rooster tail, and as the car swung around, I switched into drive and sped down the driveway. Damn, that turn was perfect. So why do I feel like throwing up? I hit the paved road and drove too fast for several minutes, eventually easing off the gas. They wouldn't be chasing me anytime soon, not with 2 tires down and a long wait for roadside assistance on a Friday night. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. I had set it to play voicemail messages aloud, like an old answering machine. David, look, I know that wasn't something you wanted to see, but please come back and let me explain. There's an explanation, I swear. Please, David, call me back. I love you. Emma repeated variations of that message, over and over. I wonder if that I love you feels as hollow to her as it does to me. Then I remembered something. Nate's phone was probably still on the boat. I called and left a voicemail that they couldn't interrupt. Nate, I have good news and bad news. Good news. We won the Babcock account. Power was out at their place, so I improvised, and they loved it. Full contract is going out next week. Now, for the bad news. First, I'm walking away from the business, effective immediately. I saw what you and Emma did, and I don't know who you are anymore. Second, Emma, I'll be filing for divorce. I don't want to see or speak to you again. You lied every time you said you loved me. That's it. Good luck figuring out your plans tonight. I hung up and kept driving, my thoughts a chaotic mess. How long has this been going on? Have they been sneaking around for years? The 4 of us spent so much time together, I'd never even considered it. Emma and Nate, my wife and my best friend. How did I miss this? The phone buzzed relentlessly. At first, I tracked how many calls per mile I was getting, a morbid distraction, but eventually, I flipped it open and powered it off. No more sharing airwaves with liars. I started having thoughts about him, Emma said, avoiding my gaze. Just like I know you've imagined being with another, I couldn't help wondering what it would be like to be with Nate. He's so different from you. So big and well, Emma mentioned he's big in every way. She gave me an awkward, embarrassed glance, then continued. But it wasn't just about that. David, I've never had any complaints about you, believe me. Nate's just this gentle giant, and I couldn't stop thinking about him. I stayed silent, trying to process her words as Emma rambled on. Rachel and I started having some really open conversations about our feelings, she explained. She told me outright that she admired you, David, and even felt drawn to you. I mentioned that you're exceptional in so many ways, and she seemed intrigued by that. Meanwhile, Nate and I were becoming more curious about each other. It was like this slow build. I interrupted, my voice cold. When did this curiosity turn serious? Emma hesitated before answering. It wasn't a specific moment, it just sort of built over time, especially after you and Nate started working together. Spending so much time as a group made it harder to ignore. At first, it was just a fantasy Rachel and I joked about sometimes. But then, well, it became more real. That's when I started asking you those questions about Rachel, testing the waters. I clenched my fists. Yeah, I remember that. You kept pushing the idea, asking if I was attracted to Rachel, and I told you flat out that it was just a fantasy. I also made it very clear why I wouldn't act on it. Because we took vows, Emma, forsaking all others. Remember that? She nodded quickly. I do remember, Emma, and I told Rachel you wouldn't go for it. I meant it at the time. I zipped my first suitcase shut, opened another, and kept packing. So, you all supposedly agreed nothing would happen, right? That Nate wouldn't touch you unless I was on board? So, what changed? Emma froze, unsure of how to answer. Finally, Rachel spoke up. The miscarriage, she said softly. I frowned, confused. What does that have to do with any of this? Emma exhaled shakily. It was a turning point for us, David. That day, it was one of the hardest moments of my life. She began recounting the memory. It had been a warm, late September day, and we were working in the yard. I started complaining of cramps, but brushed them off at first. When they worsened, you brought me inside and called the doctor. Dr. Howard asked if I might be pregnant, but I shook my head, said Emma. I'm on the pill, she said. I can't be pregnant. Dr. Howard wasn't convinced. Nothing is 100%, she said. Take her to the hospital right away. At the ER, they ran tests and confirmed that Emma had experienced what they called a chemical pregnancy. An extremely early miscarriage, too soon for a heartbeat to develop. I stayed with her, holding her hand as the cramping and bleeding finally subsided. But Emma was devastated. She withdrew from me after that, retreating into herself. I tried to be patient and supportive, even as she grew cold and distant. It wasn't until Halloween that she started to seem like herself again, decorating the house and greeting trick-or-treaters. But when I tried to rekindle intimacy that night, she pulled away, saying it was too soon. I respected her wishes. Rachel picked up the thread of the story. It was election day a week later. Emma finally agreed to come out with us, to vote, grab dinner, and watch the returns at our house. It was the first time she'd really been out since the miscarriage. She paused, glancing at Rachel. That night, I got really sick. Food poisoning, I think. Nate drove me to the hospital since everyone else was drinking. I remember being worried about leaving them alone, but we all swore nothing would happen without your blessing, said Emma. Rachel hesitated before continuing. When I got back the next day, Nate admitted the truth. He and Emma, they couldn't wait anymore. They crossed the line that night. I stared at Nate, my expression icy. He sighed heavily. It was my fault, he said. I couldn't help myself. We'd been fantasizing for so long, and with the drinking and cuddling, it just happened, said Nate. You talked about it beforehand? I asked, incredulous. Nate nodded. Yeah, we'd even discussed how it would go. He sighed again. And it went exactly how we imagined. Emma looked at me, her eyes wide with guilt. I won't make excuses, she said. We were weak. We knew it was wrong. But it was just so tempting. I slammed my suitcase shut. Stop right there, I said, my voice firm. No more lies. You said you never withheld intimacy from me. That's a blatant lie. After the miscarriage, you refused me for weeks, but just 7 days later, you were more than ready for Nate. How do you explain that? Emma stammered, at a loss for words. I don't know, she said finally. When I was with Nate, I felt comforted, safe. But with you, it brought back all those feelings of loss and grief. I didn't mean for it to happen that way. It just did. I stared at her, disgusted. I grabbed my bags and walked out, Rachel following behind me with the last of my things. As we loaded the car, she spoke softly. David, I don't know what to say. We never wanted you to feel left out, and I didn't know Emma was cutting you off. I'm so sorry. I shook my head. None of you can be trusted. Not Emma, not Nate, not even you. This isn't something I'll ever get over. Emma's voice broke. David, please. Let's all just take a break and figure this out. Maybe counseling. No, I said firmly. It's over. All of it. The marriage, the business, the friendship. I'll be in touch through my lawyer, and that's it. Goodbye. I called my lawyer, and we started discussing. That could work, but I'm warning you, it's not guaranteed. My lawyer, Ms. Bernstein, said as she adjusted her glasses. This isn't a criminal case, so we can't compel anyone to testify. The rules are different from what you see on TV. I nodded, unsure of where she was heading with this. Does your wife have a security clearance for her job? She asked. Yeah, I said. She's a publications manager for a government contractor, and I've seen her badge when she stops by on her way home. Interesting, she mused. We could threaten an alienation of affection suit. That might jeopardize her clearance. It's a dirty tactic, but it might convince Emma to agree to less damaging grounds for divorce. She'd have to accept the inevitable sooner or later. I'm not interested in punishing them, I said firmly. I just want to be free of her, of all of them. Fair enough, she replied. Let's get started. Thus ended the so-called Gang of Four, I thought bitterly. The next Tuesday night, Liam called. Be ready for anything tomorrow at 9, he told me cryptically. I didn't expect him to mean bringing a whip and a chair. When I arrived at his office, Liam introduced me to his senior team, directors, managers, account execs, and Kelly, his daughter, who was a senior account executive. Everyone was polite but frosty, especially Kelly. Thankfully, she inherited her looks from her mother. I vaguely remembered seeing her at a party once, but as a married man back then, I had avoided lingering too long on any female faces. Funny how ironic that seems now. No one trusted me. They clearly saw me as a threat. Liam gave me free rein to sit in on meetings and brainstorming sessions, but he didn't grant me any direct authority. I was left to observe and take notes. At first, I asked questions to understand their projects, but my lack of context made some of my queries seem dumb. When someone made a sarcastic remark about it, I shot back. The faster you fill me in, the fewer stupid questions I'll have. Otherwise, I can waste a lot of your time with really dumb ones. That got me some grudging cooperation. I kept listening, making notes, and sending them as advisory memos. I always ended with an offer to meet and discuss my thoughts. Slowly, a few people began inviting me to their real working sessions, where actual progress happened. Gradually, I gained some traction. People saw that I wasn't Satan incarnate, and my critiques, when given, were fair and helpful. Kelly was the toughest nut to crack. Though she started engaging with my feedback, it was only one-on-one, never involving her team. Still, it was progress. After 3 months, I walked into Liam's office, frustrated. I'm not making enough headway, Liam. It's too slow. He closed the door and leaned back in his chair. Culture change takes time, David. You're trying to win over an entire organization. He paused, then dropped a bombshell. I want to make you my deputy, with authority over the whole agency. My ultimate goal is for you to take over when I retire, but I can't rush it. If I move too quickly, we'll lose too many good people who'd resent you leapfrogging them. And Kelly? I asked. She's the obvious choice. Won't she feel slighted? Liam shrugged. It's my agency. I know what's best for the long run. Kelly isn't ready for that kind of responsibility yet. It was a daunting prospect. That's a steep hill to climb, Liam, I said honestly. He laughed. Didn't I promise to work your butt off? To help me build credibility, Liam assigned me 5 near-hopeless accounts, one from each of his senior account execs. Kelly's project was the worst of the lot, a complete disaster. Over the next few months, I turned 3 of the accounts around, including Kelly's. When I returned with a signed renewal contract for her campaign, she came into my office with a handshake. I didn't think anyone could salvage that mess, she admitted. I may have underestimated you. Not as big of an a-hole as you thought, huh? I quipped. She smirked faintly. Maybe not quite. I poured us some coffee, letting her steer the conversation. What's your ultimate goal here, David? She asked bluntly. Why don't you ask your dad? I said, I'm here at his pleasure. My goals don't matter. Liam makes the decisions. Kelly leaned back. Why leave your firma? I heard it was on the rise. I'm sure you've heard the rumors, I replied. She nodded. Sure, but let's assume I haven't. What happened? I sighed, resigned to telling the story again. Short version. I caught Nate screwing my wife, Emma. It had been going on for nearly 2 years. My home, my bed, you name it. Rachel, his wife, was in on it, thinking I'd eventually sleep with her. They wanted some 4-way partner-swapping deal, but I'm old-fashioned enough to believe in monogamy. I'm getting a divorce and dissolving the partnership. That's why I'm here. I needed a fresh start. Kelly looked stunned. Wow. I'd heard rumors, but that's worse than I imagined. That must have been brutal, professionally and personally. It's not been fun, I admitted. She hesitated. Despite everything, my team and I have found your critiques incredibly helpful. You don't attack people over taste. You explain why something works or doesn't. I was wondering if you'd consider working with my team directly. We could really learn a lot from you. I leaned back, considering her offer. If you can stand to have me in the same room as 5 women, then sure. Kelly raised an eyebrow. After what you've been through, I'm surprised you'd want to. I laughed. I can't blame an entire gender for the actions of a couple of deceitful liars. Besides, if I ever want to date again, I'll need to hold on to at least a shred of faith in humanity. Her smirk grew. All right then, let's set it up. I sat down with Kelly's team, ready to take whatever they threw at me. Say whatever you want, I said. Any topic, no limits. Consider this an open floor. No hard feelings about my past comments or anything else you don't like about me. They exchanged glances, smirking. Finally, and the tall redhead with an intense demeanor leaned back and said, "Oh, sure, David. Let us really tell you what we think, and then you'll run straight to Liam and have us fired." I gave her a calm look. First, I'm not going to do that. Second, even if I tried, Kelly would step in to protect her handpicked team. Liam wouldn't dare interfere with her decisions, and neither would I. So let's skip the paranoia. What good does it do me if I can't get your honest opinions? That opened the floodgates. Compared to them, Kelly had been my biggest supporter and led the charge, clearly the most hostile. Her striking features and stern expression made her presence feel almost intimidating. With her height, athletic build, and sharp tongue, she could easily outmatch anyone in the room, myself included. The others followed suit, piling on with criticisms about my approach, my comments, and my methods. I defended myself where I could, admitted when I was wrong, and even joked about my mistakes to lighten the mood. Slowly, the edge of their hostility dulled, but they were far from won over. Their biggest complaint? How I treated Kelly in critiques. That's nonsense, I said bluntly. Kelly has the smarts and instincts to be a major success, but she's coddled here because she's Liam's daughter. People tone down their feedback around her, and that's holding her back. She needs to face real-world criticism, honest, tough, and unfiltered. Otherwise, how can she grow? And wasn't buying it. That sounds patronizing, she challenged. Kelly sat in thoughtful silence for a few moments. Then she spoke. David might have a point, she admitted. Since I've been working with him, I've noticed myself thinking more critically. I try to anticipate where he'll poke holes in my work. I got so used to relying on my gut that I never questioned it. That's how we had the disaster with the booksellers. I thought I'd ruined it for good, but David turned it around. She looked around at her team. From now on, I want Davis's toughest critiques, every time. And I expect the same from all of you. If I can't handle it here, how can I face clients? The mood shifted after that. The meeting ended on a better note, and things slowly improved from there. Emma went along with the divorce, which was finalized 6 months later. Meanwhile, my relationship with Kelly and her team continued to develop. I saw real talent in those women, some of the best I'd worked with, but Liam kept them isolated. And when I pointed out that it was a waste of potential, he brushed it off with a curt, "My business, my call." Over time, his attitude toward me cooled. When I first arrived, he loved my take-charge attitude and my ability to shake up stale patterns. But as people began turning to me for reactions before his, I could tell he was growing uncomfortable. Liam seemed torn, wanting me to lead but resenting the authority I was unintentionally siphoning away from him. While all this was happening, I was still untangling the legal mess of dissolving my share of Firma with Nate. I refused to be in the same room as Nate, which dragged the process out. One day, while I was sparring with and over a design issue and losing, Liam pulled me aside. "I have something to discuss," he said, closing the door behind us. "Nate sent me his resume. I'm thinking about bringing him on board." I froze, staring at him. "You're joking," I said, my voice rising. Liam gave me a condescending look. "Nate has a stellar reputation in graphics. His attention to detail is exactly what we need here." "How do I feel about it?" "Like you're trying to kick me in the balls," I said, not caring if my voice carried. "David, you need to grow up and separate your personal feelings from what's best for the agency," he said dismissively. I was stunned. Liam, the man who had brought me in to shake up the company, was now turning on me. It became clear. He wanted me gone. Whether out of jealousy, insecurity, or second thoughts, he was forcing my hand. "Fine," I said. "It's your agency. Do what you want. I'll clear out by the end of the day." Liam frowned. "Careful, David. I don't respond well to ultimatums." This isn't an ultimatum. It's a resignation, I said flatly. As I packed up my office, Kelly and her team showed up. David, what just happened? Kelly demanded. You're Liam's golden boy. What's going on? I sighed. Liam wanted me as his deputy and eventual successor, but he couldn't commit. When it started happening naturally, he pushed back. Bringing Nate in was his way of making me quit. Kelly shook her head. So what now? I'm starting my own shop, I said. I've already got plans. And tonight, I'm ordering Chinese and figuring out my next move. Kelly hesitated. Well, don't be surprised if you get some visitors, she said. We'll bring our own Chinese. That night, Sherry and Andrea showed up at my door, Chinese food in hand. We're in, and said, don't screw it up, or I'll hurt you. Kelly stayed at Dittersdorf. Liam offered her my job and a guaranteed promotion in 2 years. She made the smart choice. I grinned. Let's just say, all in good time. Most of the sentence was suspended, but Nate was fired, of course, and he's now a nationally registered sex offender. The ad industry? Completely closed off to him. Nate packed up and moved out west. Last I heard, he's working freelance for a hunting gear company. I think he illustrates their catalogs. Nate wasn't always like this, I admitted. But I think having both Rachel and Emma at his beck and call gave him delusions of being irresistible. He thought he could get away with anything, a self-styled harem king. I shrugged. That's my theory anyway. Months after I left Dittersdorf, I attended a local media awards dinner with Anne. I'd arranged for our table to be on the opposite side of the room from the Dittersdorf crew, hoping to avoid any drama. But when Nate spotted me, he made a beeline straight for our table. I saw him coming, and I shook my head firmly, signaling for him to stay away. He ignored it. When he reached me, his hand was outstretched for a handshake. I slapped it away and gave him a quick 1-2 combo. One punch to his gut, the other to his jaw. The big oaf dropped like a sack of potatoes. Without another word, I collected and left. Ethan suddenly glanced at his watch, clearly getting ready to leave. Before he could excuse himself, a near-Amazonian redhead swept into the pub, turning heads as she approached. Without hesitation, she pulled me into a kiss that could have made the walls shake. When she let me go, I turned to Ethan, grinning. Ethan, meet and my wife, business partner, and sparring partner, and offered him a firm handshake. It's a pleasure to meet one of David's old friends, she said, her voice warm. Ethan laughed. I like happy endings, he said, eyeing the two of us. She rolled her eyes. Oh, you wouldn't believe how many times I've heard it. And you shouldn't believe half of it. He's left out all the juicy bits where I'm the hero, of course. Juicy bits? I said, feigning innocence. You mean the part where you seduced me in your office? Weak from lack of Chinese food, as I recall. Exactly, and teased, winking at Ethan. What's a girl to do? He was invulnerable to my charms until I combined soy sauce with S. Desperate times, Ethan. Ethan roared with laughter. I see why you two are a perfect match. How did you win David over, Anne? After everything, he was pretty sour on romance. She glanced at me with a knowing smile. Simple. I made it clear that he's mine and mine alone. And I backed it up with martial arts training. I mock-winced. She practices on me every day. And every night, she added playfully. Ethan shook his head, grinning. It's been great catching up, David. And you're a delight. If you two are ever out west, give me a call. He shrugged on his coat, pausing at the door to take one last look at us. You know, I've rarely seen two people this happy together. Take care, both of you. As Ethan left and turned to me. So, what's the plan now? The kitchen's closed, and I've had enough of your long-winded stories. Chinese again? I suggested. She smirked. No MSG this time. I've got other plans for you tonight. And with that, we left the pub, laughing into the night.